Robert Kiyosaki grew up having two fathers. One was a highly educated teacher with a PhD, whilst the other never finished 8th grade. Both men were relatively successful in their careers with substantial incomes, though one died leaving tens of millions to his family, charities and church, whilst the other died leaving bills still to be paid. Here are the key things that the book Rich Dad Poor Dad teaches in order for you to end up like Robert's rich dad rather than his poor dad. But first, it would be much appreciated if you press the like and subscribe buttons to help my channel grow. Okay, so the first key takeaway from this book is that education is key. Both dads believed very strongly in education, but not the same kind of education. Poor dad would say that a school education with good grades was important for financial success in life, i.e. having a high-paying job. On the other hand, rich dad would say that financial education is key. Unfortunately, financial education is not taught in school, so instead families are the ones who are left with this job. Unfortunately, most parents cannot effectively teach their children to be financially successful, as they themselves are usually not, meaning that they only have knowledge of how to be poor. Another thing I'd like to mention is that looking at myself, I've studied economics, accounting, mathematics and investing to a relatively high level at university, though I still think that I've actually learned more about financial success from reading the book Rich Dad Poor Dad. Now, I'm not saying that these subjects that I've been studying are a waste of time. No, in fact Robert Kiyosaki himself does talk about the importance of taking outside classes. For instance, he took classes in accounting in order to help him build his financial literacy skills. For me though, I think what makes this book really special is the potential change in mindset that it gave me, where I finally understood how I could take full control of my financial life. So in my opinion, learning in school or even in university isn't enough to be financially successful. Remember, you can very easily be professionally successful yet financially illiterate, just like Robert's poor dad was. Okay, now before I move on to one of the more important concepts in this book, it's really important for you to understand the difference between assets and liabilities. Robert Kiyosaki explains it in a really nice way in his book. Assets put money in your pocket, while liabilities take money from your pockets. Yep, I know what you're thinking. This is entirely different to what is taught in accounting theory in terms of what they teach about assets and liabilities. And so if you're interested, I actually do have a video on these differences and how this can be used to your advantage over here. So now that I've told you what an asset and liability is, I can now mention my second main takeaway from this book, and that is the use of financial statements. So Robert uses financial statements in order to demonstrate the differences between how the rich and the poor handle their finances. For instance, here are 3 sets of financial statements that I'll show you. The one on the left is for a poor person, the one in the middle is for a middle class person, and the one on the right is for a rich person. But what are the differences? Well, first we'll look at the poor person. Their balance sheet is empty, and this of course means that they have no assets or liabilities. If you look closely, the only money inflow is from their job in the form of a salary, and this goes through their income column only to vanish completely in the form of expenses such as food and transportation. Now let's look at the middle class person. His cash flow pattern is very similar. The only difference is that the income from his salary goes through the liabilities box first instead, and then goes out as expenses. So for instance, they may own a car, which is a liability, and so their income will leave in the form of an expense, which in this case, because they have a car, will be a car payment. The mistake here is that the middle class confuse assets for liabilities. Another good example to use would be that most people, when they own a house, most middle class people think that a house is an asset. But if you were to look at their financial statements, you can very clearly see that their mortgage is in the liability column and their mortgage payment and council taxes, which are a consequence of owning a house, are in the expense column. Now, the final thing we will look at will be the rich person's financial statements. And so this person owns a lot more assets than liabilities. And the key difference here is that these assets are what is producing this person's income, not a job. So, for example, they may have real estate, this can produce rental income, they may have stocks, this will produce dividends for them, and they may have intellectual properties that pay out royalties on a regular basis. Point 3. Now, for this point, it's very important to understand. Rich people do have liabilities on their financial statements as well, and you must have seen this in the diagram that I just showed you. So they do have liabilities as well as assets, but it's not the same as for how the middle class and poor would handle this. What is different about the rich is that the income, that the assets they have actually generate is much more than enough to cover all of their expenses. This is in essence what this book recommends in order for you to become rich. Cash flow is king, not cash alone. Let me summarize what this means for you. In order to be rich and not middle class or poor, you must be in a position whereby the income generated from your assets exceeds the expenses generated by you and your liabilities. The next key point is to understand, what do you do when your income starts going up? And this is actually something that's really important. Here's what usually happens to people when their incomes start going up, especially with young professionals. It's a little something called lifestyle creep. As your income goes up, so do your expenses. You can earn as much money as you want, but if you don't know how to manage that money, the end result will still be the same. And this is something that was really important for you to understand, as mentioned in the book. If you continue to use your income to acquire liabilities as the middle class do, this will cause you to have regular expenditure. This will lead you to ending up in a position where you have to work in order to cover those expenses, and this is what Robert says is the rat race. Okay, so for my fifth and final point, we will look at how you can develop a high financial intelligence. Robert Kiyosaki says that his success reflects the importance of having a strong financial foundation. For instance, being able to understand the financial statements I just showed you. And this all starts with building and having a strong financial education. So how can you do this? Well, financial intelligence is made up of 4 main technical skills. The first is accounting, which is, in other words, financial literacy. Again, this is what I studied at university, and I strongly agree that accounting is very key for understanding both businesses and investments when wanting to make investment decisions. For example, I've gained a very in-depth understanding of financial statements far beyond the knowledge that an average person would have. The second key skill is investing. Do you know the difference between value and growth investing, value and growth stocks? Can you identify a strong cash flow property? Can you identify when a stock is undervalued and so it's a good time to buy a stock? Thirdly is understanding the markets, or in other words, the science of supply and demand. So you need to understand these forces and be able to use them to your advantage. The final main technical skill is the law. The law is everywhere. Awareness of regulation and rules is critical in order to stay within legal boundaries in your business and investing pursuits. To finish off this video, let me just make it clear that the main point of this book is that having increased financial intelligence can be used to solve many of life's common problems. But the question is, how can we improve this intelligence? Well, quite clearly, it is through learning. More specifically, learning in the context of the 4 main technical skills I just mentioned. Unfortunately, independent education outside of the formal education system is what is required. Now, before we finish, I'll leave you with a final quote from the book. The key to financial freedom and great wealth is in a person's ability to convert earned income into passive and/or portfolio income. Okay, that's all for now. If you like this book review, I'll definitely be reviewing and summarizing more of Robert Kiyosaki's books in the coming weeks. But for now, thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, remember to subscribe to the channel to keep yourself updated. Have a good day. Bye.